in the US. Of course, in the US we consume a hell of a lot of more energy than we should, and we are not energy conservative about it, and we are trying our best now to move forward on this. But at the same time, we are now it's a globalized problem. You cannot just say it's an internal problem, because what's happening in China and India is affecting us. What happens in the environment from climate change is not going to affect. We are in one globe, we are in one earth. It's not going to say I can just take care and to hell with the rest of the world. I better realize that I have to also contribute to the climate change issues, and how I come up with clean environmental technologies. In the food crisis issue, again, it's similar to an energy crisis issue. Okay, there's a greater demand for food. One of the issues is there a problem of insufficient food supplies? As a matter of fact, we can grow enough food for the entire rest of the world. But we've also, and this is where one of the difficulties in the US too, we've been moving in a move to biofuels. The government has been paying $7 billion to farmers, yeah, for maize now being pushed towards biofuels. So in a sense, whereas when they had an opportunity to go through in an international trade sort of environment, to go with Brazil, who uses sugarcane for biofuels, the US said no to it, and really started using food supplies for biofuels. This also has a significant contribution to the food crisis issue. We've also subsidized farmers not to grow so that food prices could be kept at a certain level. Okay, so in a sense, it's this issue of we can grow, but of course there's a greater demand for food, because you are having populations, especially in China and India, Brazil and other countries that are the emerging nations of the world, who are demanding more. Their diets are improving, so they're asking for much more. So there's a greater demand for energy, there's a greater demand for food. And this is not going to end, because as more countries end up in developing themselves, there's a more greater demand for natural resources and raw materials. So in a sense, we are facing that issue. I think, of course, climate change is another factor in terms of the food crisis issue. We need to have a better sort of strategy on how we address the food crisis issue. It should not be always a crisis in itself. We need to be prepared for it. We need to address why these problems happen. In terms of the environment, we need to address the issue of cleaner technologies. And again, I come back to the point that Ambassador Kamal raised. Yes, we need to set an example in the United States of America by setting an example that we can behave. We can, at a certain point of the United States was that beacon call where everybody looked at the United States as an example of moral values, of development, of institutions, and a number of other things. But what has happened is something happened here, and now we are not being looked at as an example. Now, of course, at the same time, it has hurt us in the United States, and a lot of citizens in this country are hurting, whether it's economically, and sometimes we forget there are people in this country who even have difficult access to food. Okay, and they have difficult access to food, clothing, and shelter. And yes, you have to take care of your own, but you cannot. Still, when you look at the larger part of the world, we are still the more fortunate in the world. And whether we like it or not, we still have to be part of this global context. We are still leading the world in many areas. The US has to pay its role. We have been one of the biggest polluters in the world, and we have to clean up our act in that, because we consume for the population of the Western world. If I remember right, I don't know how old my statistics are, in the Western world or the advanced nations, where 16 to 18% of the world population, what we consume over 50% of natural resources, raw materials. That is not going to be tolerated, because you're going to get an increasing population that is happening in the emerging nations of the world. And you cannot go on, you have to have some equity in the way how you use these natural resources.
Over to you for questions, starting from Madison, 2 questions from each university, and we'll answer them, and after Madison, we'll go to Lehigh. Over to Madison.
Good morning, Ambassador Kamal. Good morning, Director Muthu Kamaru. We are grateful for the time that you've devoted to this session. Andrew has a question to start out with.
Hi, my name is Andrew, and I'm a freshman. You said the U.S. is not looked as an example anymore. If we are not, then who is looked at as an example to set the standards?
Okay, second question.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm a freshman. I'm wondering, what is the UNDP doing to help the developing countries become accountable and responsible for their fair share in the war on poverty?
Okay, is the US an example, and if not, who is? And what does the UNDP do in governance?
Okay. Let me first start with Andrew. Andrew, first, I have to be careful. I'm not saying that the US is not being looked as an example. US is still being looked as an example, but it's not solely today. And a lot of the things that have been happening today, it has lost its credibility in a lot of the developing world. And what's happening is that if I'm sitting in a developing country and I'm not having access to food, clothing, shelter, and I'm really having problems, I am going to start looking at different parts of the world where models exist, where advancements are happening, where they're attacking poverty and raising these issues. As most of you know, that somehow or the other, the Chinese model is picking up in many parts of Africa and Latin America. Okay? Now, in a sense, I'm not saying the Chinese model of communism, I'm not getting into that. I'm talking about the whole development model, their ability to get food to their people, to make themselves sufficient as individuals, as citizens, you know. And they are looking, they see that for the last umpteen years, the Western world or the advanced nations of the world or the Western world has been coming up with models, but it's not helped them. And then they are, in their dire circumstance, they are looking for other solutions. So in a sense, not to say that they still look at the US, and they look at the US, and the US continues to be a beacon of hope and continues to be that. But it has lost a lot of credibility in that process. And in a sense, in that intrinsic thing of people, of countries and individuals, of citizens of the developing world trying to get out of their own misery, they look at other countries that are progressing, especially those who have been developing themselves, and seeing what have these countries benefited by, what have they followed, what are their solutions. And that is why this whole concept of what they call South-South cooperation is also setting in, is that looking at the Malaysias, the Singapores, the Brazils, the Chinas, and the developing world is looking more and more at these to move forward and to help in that context. Okay. Let me the question by Brian. As UNDP, as I said in the very beginning, you know, let me just say one of the things is, while the focus has been looking at what the advanced world and the developed world and what the emerging countries of the world need to provide developing countries, we are getting this whole issue of results-based management as an intrinsic and accountability for developing countries more and more solidified. Because we are saying to these developing countries, fundamentally, we cannot be throwing money on you continuously if your own governments are not using these monies in the most accountable manner. Now, fundamentally, let me give you a statistic, because they say close to $500 billion has gone in the last 25, 30 years to Africa. And we do not know what the heck has happened to those resources. Some countries have progressed, some countries have not. Now, on one side of it, all of us who have been involved in development, the models that we've used also may not have been the appropriate models. We've been giving monies without insufficient holding these countries fully accountable for the resources. The other part of it is that you cannot throw money into these countries if they do not have basic capacities and infrastructure to manage development. You can do band-aid type of approach, but that band-aid should be short-lived. When you're throwing money, the first thing in UNDP, what our biggest area that we focus on in the term of our areas of governance, democratic governance, poverty alleviation, is the issue of capacity building and capacity development. And what I mean by capacity building and capacity development is helping these developing countries build the basic institutions like government ministries with proper civil service so that they have proper educated people to man these civil government